Kyle Morrison walked through the lower maintenance tunnels of New Terra Station with his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. The night shift had been long, and his back ached from loading cargo containers for 10 straight hours. Most workers took the main corridors back to the residential sectors. But Kyle preferred the quiet shortcuts through the station's underbelly. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer pitying looks from coworkers who still remembered the shuttle accident 3 years ago. The tunnel lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across the metal walls. Pipes and conduits ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping recycled water that left rust stains on the floor. Kyle's boots echoed in the empty space as he moved past storage areas and abandoned equipment. This route saved him 15 minutes, and at 2 in the morning, every minute mattered. He was halfway through the tunnel when he heard it. A small sound, barely audible over the hum of the station's life support systems. Kyle stopped and listened. There it was again, a soft whimper coming from behind a stack of cargo containers pushed against the wall. Kyle's first thought was that some animal had gotten loose from the exotic pet shop on level 7. It happened sometimes. But as he moved closer, he saw something that made him freeze. A child sat huddled behind the containers, knees pulled up to her chest. But she was not human. Her skin was pale blue, almost luminescent. In the dim tunnel light, large eyes, far bigger than any human child's, stared up at him with pure terror. She had delicate features and small pointed ears that lay flat against her head. Her clothes were torn and filthy, hanging loose on her thin frame. Kyle recognized the species immediately. She was Velen, one of the empathic races from the Outer Rim territories. He had worked with a few Velens on the docks, quiet workers who kept to themselves, but he had never seen a Velen child before, and certainly not one alone in the maintenance tunnels. "Hey," Kyle said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The child pressed herself harder against the wall. Her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. Kyle could see her ribs through her thin shirt. Dirt covered her face and arms, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her shoulders. Kyle crouched down slowly, making himself smaller and less threatening. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders from years of dock work. He must look terrifying to this small creature. "Do you understand me?" he asked in Standard, the common language used across the galaxy. The child nodded, just barely. "What's your name?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet Kyle almost missed it, she whispered, "Lyra. Lyra, that's a nice name. I'm Kyle." He kept his voice gentle, the way he used to talk to his daughter when she had nightmares. The memory stung, but he pushed it aside. "What are you doing down here, Lyra? Where are your parents?" At the word parents, the child's eyes filled with tears. They spilled down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the grime on her face. "Gone," she said. "The bad ships came. Fire everywhere. Mama told me to hide. I hid in the air duct. When I came out, everyone was gone. Just bodies." Kyle's chest tightened. Raiders. The Outer Rim territories had been plagued by them for years. Criminal gangs that targeted civilian transports, stealing cargo, and leaving no witnesses. He had heard stories, but hearing it from this small child made his stomach turn. "How did you get to this station?" he asked. "Our ship docked here before, for repairs. I remembered the way. I hid in a cargo pod. Took 3 days to get here." Lyra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Been here for, I don't know, many days. I hide. I find food in the trash, but people chase me away, say I smell bad, say Velens don't belong here." Kyle felt anger rise in his throat. He looked at this child, this frightened, starving child who had watched her family die and traveled alone through space, and all he could think about was how many people must have walked past her in these tunnels. How many had seen her and done nothing? "When did you last eat?" he asked. Lyra thought about it. 2 days? Maybe 3. There was bread near the kitchen vents. Kyle made a decision. It was probably stupid. It would definitely complicate his life. But he could not walk away from this child. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. Lyra stared at his hand like it might be a trap. Velens were empathic. She could probably sense his emotions, feel his sincerity or his deception. Whatever she sensed must have been enough, because after a moment, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, like bird bones. Kyle helped her stand, and she swayed on her feet. He realized she was weak from hunger and exhaustion. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her legs buckled. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground. Without thinking, he picked her up. She weighed almost nothing, far too light for a child her size. "Easy now. I've got you." Lyra tensed in his arms for a moment, then relaxed slightly. Kyle carried her through the tunnels, his mind racing. He lived alone, in a small one-bedroom apartment, in the residential sector. Harboring an undocumented alien was illegal. The station authorities would fine him heavily, maybe even arrest him. And that was if they believed his story about finding her. Some might think he had smuggled her aboard for illegal purposes. But what was the alternative? Turn her over to station security? They would process her, put her in some facility while they tried to contact Velen authorities. She would be alone, scared, in a system that clearly had not protected her so far. The thought of this child spending even one more night afraid and hungry made Kyle's decision easier. He reached his apartment building without running into anyone. The late hour helped. Most residents were asleep. Kyle used his keycard to access his unit on the 7th floor and carried Lyra inside. His apartment was small and plain. A couch, a table, a small kitchen area. Nothing fancy, nothing personal. He had packed away all the photos and mementos after the accident. Looking at them hurt too much. Kyle set Lyra down gently on the couch. She looked around the apartment with wide eyes, as if she could not believe she was somewhere safe and warm. "Wait here," Kyle said. "I'll get you some food." He went to the kitchen and opened his refrigerator. He had some leftover noodles from 2 days ago and half a protein bar. Not much, but it would have to do for now. He heated the noodles in the microwave and brought them to her with a glass of water. Lyra grabbed the bowl with both hands and ate like she had never seen food before. She barely chewed, just shoveled the noodles into her mouth as fast as she could. Kyle had to stop her halfway through. "Slow down. You'll make yourself sick." She looked up at him with those huge eyes, noodles still hanging from her mouth. Despite everything, Kyle almost smiled. When was the last time he had smiled? After she finished eating, Lyra's eyes started to droop. The food and warmth were making her drowsy. Kyle found a blanket in his closet and brought it to her. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, spreading the blanket over her. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Lyra curled up on the couch, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are kind. Most people are not kind to Velens." Kyle did not know what to say to that. He watched as her eyes closed and her breathing slowed. Within minutes, she was asleep. Probably the first real sleep she had gotten in weeks. He sat in his chair across from the couch and rubbed his face with both hands. What had he done? He had just brought an alien child into his home, with no plan, no legal authorization, and no idea what came next. His life had been simple before tonight. Lonely. Yes. But simple. Work. Sleep. Repeat. No complications. No attachments. No risk of losing anyone else. But as he watched Lyra sleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully, Kyle knew he could not regret his choice. She was alive. She was safe. For tonight, that was enough. The first week was harder than Kyle expected. Lyra barely spoke unless he asked her a direct question. She ate the food he gave her but always looked surprised when he offered more, as if she expected him to stop feeding her at any moment. She flinched whenever he moved too quickly or raised his voice, even when he was just talking on his comm device to work. Kyle had to call in sick for 3 days to figure things out. He could not leave her alone in the apartment. Not yet. She was too fragile, too scared. He used the time to research everything he could about Velans. He learned that they were an empathic species, able to sense emotions in others through touch and proximity. Strong emotions could overwhelm young Velans who had not learned to control their abilities. He learned they needed certain minerals in their diet, things not found in standard human food. He learned that Velan children formed deep bonds with their caregivers, and that losing those bonds could cause lasting trauma. That last part made him think about Lyra's parents, about what she had witnessed. No wonder she was so withdrawn. On the fourth day, Kyle had to return to work. He left Lyra in the apartment with strict instructions not to answer the door or make noise. He gave her his old tablet loaded with educational programs and entertainment. He promised he would be back in 10 hours. Lyra nodded but said nothing. Kyle could see fear in her eyes as he left. He felt like the worst person in the galaxy. Work dragged on forever. Kyle kept checking the time, wondering if Lyra was okay, if she had run away, if station security had somehow found her. When his shift finally ended, he practically ran back to his apartment. He found her exactly where he had left her, sitting on the couch with the tablet. She had not moved except to use the bathroom. When she saw him, her whole body relaxed. "I thought you might not come back," she said quietly. Kyle's heart broke a little. "I'll always come back, Lyra. I promise." By the end of the second week, things started to improve. Lyra began exploring the apartment when Kyle was home. She discovered his collection of old movies and asked questions about Earth, about humans, about everything. She was incredibly bright and learned fast. Kyle bought her new clothes, proper Velan food supplements from the station's alien goods store, and some books written in both standard and Velan script. He had to be careful about how much he bought, not wanting to draw attention, but he could not stand seeing her in those torn rags anymore. One evening after work, Kyle came home exhausted and frustrated. A shipping container had fallen that day, nearly crushing one of his co-workers. The station safety officer had blamed Kyle's team for improper loading. Even though they had followed every protocol, Kyle had spent 2 hours filling out incident reports and listening to lectures about procedures he already knew by heart. He opened the apartment door ready to collapse on the couch, but Lyra was sitting there. Usually, she retreated to the corner when he came home, giving him space. But this time, she stood up and walked toward him. Kyle froze. In 2 weeks, Lyra had never initiated contact with him. She always waited for him to come to her. "You are upset," she said. It was not a question. She could feel it, sense his frustration and exhaustion through her empathic abilities. "Bad day at work," Kyle said, trying to soften his tone. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." But Lyra reached out and placed her small hand on his arm. The moment she touched him, Kyle felt something strange. A wave of calm washed over him, like someone had taken all his anger and frustration and gently set them aside. It was not that the feelings disappeared, but they became manageable, less overwhelming. He looked down at Lyra in surprise. She was concentrating hard, her face serious. She was sharing her own emotions with him through their contact, giving him some of her peace to balance his turmoil. Something inside Kyle broke. All the grief he had been carrying for 3 years, all the loneliness, all the pain of losing his wife and daughter in that shuttle accident, it all came rushing to the surface. He sank down onto the couch and put his head in his hands. For the first time since the funeral, Kyle Morrison cried, and Lyra stayed beside him. She kept her hand on his arm, sharing that sense of calm and understanding. She did not speak, did not ask questions. She just stayed, offering wordless comfort the way only a Velan could. When Kyle finally stopped crying, he felt lighter somehow. Emptier, but in a good way. Like he had been carrying a heavy weight, and someone had finally helped him set it down. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Lyra nodded. "You helped me. I help you. That is what family does. Family." The word hit Kyle like a physical blow. Was that what they were becoming? He had been thinking of this as temporary, a situation he was managing until he could figure out the proper channels for getting Lyra real help. But looking at her now, He realized he did not want temporary. He wanted to keep her, to protect her, to give her a real home. The next day, Kyle contacted his old friend Ben Carter. They had gone to academy together before Kyle dropped out to work the docks. Ben had become a lawyer specializing in station regulations and interspecies law. If anyone could help Kyle navigate this situation, it was Ben. They met at a quiet cafe in the commercial sector. Kyle explained everything. Finding Lyra, taking her in, wanting to make it legal. Ben listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "You understand that what you did was illegal," Ben said when Kyle finished. "Harboring an undocumented alien, failure to report a refugee, potential kidnapping charges, if anyone wants to push it. I know. But I could not just leave her there." Ben sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I know. And honestly, I probably would have done the same thing. But making this legal is going to be complicated. Cross-species adoption is possible, but the paperwork is insane. You'll need to prove you can meet her physical and cultural needs, pass psychological evaluations, get approval from Velen authorities. It could take months, maybe years. I don't care how long it takes," Kyle said firmly. "I want to do this right. Lyra deserves a real home, a real family." Ben studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll help you. But Kyle, you need to understand what you're signing up for. A lot of species don't understand why humans adopt outside their own kind. You're going to face questions, judgment, maybe even hostility. Are you ready for that?" Kyle thought about Lyra waiting in his apartment, probably watching the door and hoping he would come back like he promised. He thought about how she had comforted him last night, how she had called them family. "Yes," he said. "I'm ready." Over the next few weeks, Kyle and Lyra settled into a routine. He worked his shifts at the docks while she stayed in the apartment, studying through remote learning programs Ben had helped him set up. When he came home, they ate dinner together. She told him about what she had learned that day, and he told her about the different ships that had docked at the station. Lyra began to smile more. She laughed at jokes, asked for second helpings at dinner, and started leaving her drawings around the apartment. She drew pictures of ships and stars, of her family before the raiders came, of Kyle and herself together. Kyle put every drawing up on his walls. For the first time in 3 years, his apartment looked lived in. It looked like a home. One night, as Kyle tucked her into the bed he had bought for her, Lyra looked up at him with those big eyes. "Kyle, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you help me? Other humans saw me in the tunnels. Other people walked past. But you stopped. Why?" Kyle thought about how to explain. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you needed help, and I could give it. Because no child should be alone and scared. But I am not human. I am different." "Different doesn't matter," Kyle said. "What matters is that you were a kid who needed someone to care. That's enough." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Through the contact, she shared what she was feeling. Gratitude, affection, trust, and something deeper, the beginning of love. Kyle squeezed her hand gently. "Get some sleep, Lyra. Big day tomorrow." He had received a message earlier that day. His mother was coming to visit from Earth next month for his birthday. He had not told her about Lyra yet. He had no idea how Helen Morrison would react to learning her son had adopted an alien child. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, Kyle had a daughter sleeping safely in the next room. And that was more than he had dared to hope for in a long time. Helen Morrison arrived at New Terra Station on a Tuesday afternoon. Kyle met her at the docking bay with Lyra hiding behind his legs, her small hands gripping his jacket. He had tried to prepare both of them for this meeting, but now that the moment had arrived, his stomach was in knots. Helen stepped off the transport shuttle looking exactly like Kyle remembered. She was 64 years old, with gray hair cut short and practical. She wore comfortable traveling clothes and carried a single bag. When she saw Kyle, her face lit up with joy. Then she noticed Lyra. Her smile faltered, her eyes went wide. She stopped walking and just stared. "Mom," Kyle said, his voice steady despite his nerves. This is Lyra. Lyra, this is my mother, Helen. Lyra peeked out from behind Kyle's legs and gave a small wave. Hello, Grandmother Helen. Helen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Kyle with an expression that demanded answers. Kyle had known this moment would be difficult, but he had hoped for a better start. They took a transport pod back to Kyle's apartment in awkward silence. Helen kept glancing at Lyra, who sat pressed against Kyle's side, sensing the older woman's confusion and uncertainty through her empathic abilities. By the time they reached the apartment, the tension was thick enough to cut. Kyle got Helen settled in the small guest space he had prepared, then made tea while Lyra retreated to her room. When he brought the tea out, his mother was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. Explain, she said simply. Kyle told her everything. He started with the night he found Lyra in the tunnels, and went through the past 2 months in detail. How he had taken her in, cared for her, started the legal adoption process. He explained about the raiders, about Lyra's trauma, about how much she had grown and healed in his care. Helen listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Kyle finished, she was quiet for a long time. Kyle, she finally said, her voice careful. I understand why you helped her. Of course you helped her. You have a good heart. But adoption? An alien child? Have you thought this through? Really thought it through? Every day, Mom. I think about it every day. You lost Caroline and Emma 3 years ago. You're still grieving. Are you sure this isn't just you? Trying to fill that void? Trying to replace what you lost? Kyle felt anger flash through him, but he forced it down. Lyra is not a replacement. She's herself. And yes, I'm still grieving. I'll probably always be grieving, but that doesn't make this wrong. She needs me, and I need her. We're healing each other. Helen's expression softened slightly. And what happens when the grief passes? When you move on with your life? What happens to her then? She'll still be my daughter. That won't change. Daughter, Helen repeated, as if testing the word. She shook her head. Kyle, I'm worried about you. About both of you. This is such a big commitment. Different species, different needs, years of legal battles ahead. Are you really ready for all that? I'm already committed, Mom. The papers are filed. Ben is handling the legal side. This is happening. Helen looked toward the hallway where Lyra's room was. Does she even want this? Have you asked her? She calls me family. She calls you grandmother. I think that's my answer. His mother sighed deeply. I just want you to be sure. I don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret. The words stung more than Kyle expected. He stood up. Lyra is not a mistake. She's the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years. The stape tended. Also, he walked to Lyra's room and knocked gently. Come on out. It's okay. Lyra emerged hesitantly. She looked at Helen with those big eyes, clearly sensing the older woman's doubts and concerns. Kyle could see her shoulders slump slightly. The first 2 days of Helen's visit were tense. She was polite to Lyra but distant. She asked basic questions like how Lyra was learning and what she ate, but there was no warmth in it. It felt like an interview, not a conversation. Lyra withdrew again, becoming quiet and careful around Helen. Kyle felt caught between them, trying to make both comfortable and failing at both. On the 3rd day, disaster struck. Kyle received an emergency call from the docks. A cargo ship had docked with critical damage to its environmental systems. They needed all hands to unload the perishable supplies before they spoiled. It would take at least 6 hours. Kyle looked at Lyra and his mother sitting on opposite sides of the living room, the silence between them heavy. He did not want to leave them alone together, but he had no choice. I have to go to work, he said. Mom, can you watch Lyra? Helen nodded stiffly. Of course. I'll be back as soon as I can. He kissed the top of Lyra's head. Be good. After Kyle left, the silence in the apartment grew even thicker. Helen sat on the couch reading something on her tablet. Lyra sat in the corner, drawing in her sketchbook. An hour passed. Then another. Helen tried to focus on her reading, but she kept glancing at the small alien child across the room. Lyra was so quiet, so still, almost like she was trying to disappear. It reminded Helen of the way traumatized children behaved in her years as a teacher, trying to be invisible, to not take up space, to not be a burden. The thought made her chest tighten uncomfortably. Then Lyra began to hum. It was soft, barely audible at first, a simple melody that drifted across the room. Helen's head snapped up. She knew that song. It was a lullaby she had sung to Kyle when he was small, something her own mother had taught her. "Where did you learn that?" Helen asked. Lyra stopped humming immediately, looking scared. "I'm sorry. I will be quiet." "No, it's okay. I just want to know where you learned that song. Kyle hums it sometimes, when he cooks dinner. I liked it, so I remembered." Helen set down her tablet. "Do you know what it is?" Helen set down her tablet. Lyra shook her head. "It's a lullaby. A song mothers sing to their children to help them sleep." Something crossed Lyra's face. Pain, loss, grief. "My mother sang to me too. Different songs, Velen songs. I try to remember them, but they're fading. It's been so long." Helen felt her heart crack. "Tell me about your mother." And Lyra did. She told Helen about her mother's voice, about the songs and stories, about the games they played. She told her about her father's laugh and her older brother's teasing. She described her home world, the colors of the sky and the smell of the flowers that grew wild near their house. Then she told Helen about the night the raiders came. How her mother had pushed her into an air duct and told her to be quiet, to be brave. How she had heard the sounds of fighting and then terrible silence. How she had stayed in that duct for hours, too scared to come out. By the time Lyra finished, Helen had tears running down her face. This child had lost everything. Her family, her home, her entire world. And she had survived alone for weeks before Kyle found her. "I'm so sorry," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." Lyra wiped her own eyes. "It's okay. Kyle found me. He saved me. Now I have family again." Helen looked at this small, brave child who had endured more trauma than most adults would face in a lifetime, and she realized Kyle was right. Lyra was not a replacement for the family he had lost. She was a second chance, for both of them. "Come here," Helen said, opening her arms. Lyra hesitated for only a moment before crossing the room. She climbed onto the couch next to Helen, who wrapped her arms around the child. Lyra was thin and light, her skin cool to the touch, but when she relaxed against Helen's side, she felt like any other child seeking comfort. "You know what?" Helen said. "I think I remember some of the other verses to that lullaby. Would you like to learn them?" Lyra nodded eagerly. Helen sang, and Lyra listened, soaking up every word. Then they sang it together, Lyra's sweet voice blending with Helen's older one. When they finished, Lyra smiled up at Helen, the first real smile she had given the older woman. "I like singing with you, Grandmother Helen." Grandmother. The word hit Helen with unexpected force. She had lost her only grandchildren in the shuttle accident. Emma had been 7, full of energy and questions. Helen had thought she would never have that relationship again, never get to teach a child songs or read them stories or watch them grow. But here was Lyra, looking up at her with trust and affection, ready to accept her as family, if only Helen would accept Lyra in return. "I like singing with you too," Helen said, her voice catching. "How about I teach you how to make cookies? Would you like that?" Lyra's eyes went wide. "Real cookies? With chocolate?" "With lots of chocolate." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen. Helen showed Lyra how to measure ingredients, how to mix the dough, how to shape the cookies. They made a mess. Flour everywhere, and chocolate smeared on their hands. Lyra laughed when Helen playfully dabbed dough on her nose. They were pulling the first batch from the oven when Kyle came home. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene before him, his mother and Lyra, both covered in flour, laughing together over a tray of slightly burnt cookies. "We made cookies," Lyra announced proudly. "Grandmother Helen taught me." Kyle looked at his mother. She smiled at him, a real smile full of warmth and affection. "She's a natural baker. We're starting on a second batch." That night, after Lyra had gone to bed, Helen pulled Kyle aside. "You were right," she said quietly. "About everything. She's wonderful, Kyle. She's been through hell, but she's so strong, so full of life. I'm sorry I doubted you." Kyle felt relief wash over him. "So you're okay with this? With the adoption?" Helen laughed, wiping at her eyes. "Okay with it? Kyle, I'm canceling my return flight. I'm moving here." "What?" "I can't leave her. I can't leave you both. You're my family. And now, so is she. I'll sell the house on Earth, find an apartment nearby. That girl needs a grandmother, and I need her just as much." Kyle hugged his mother tight. "Thank you, Mom." "No," Helen said. "Thank you. For giving me a reason to live again. For giving me a granddaughter to love." In her room, Lyra lay in bed clutching the stuffed animal Helen had given her earlier. She could sense the happiness in the apartment, the love surrounding her. For the first time since the raiders came, she felt truly safe. She had a father and a grandmother now. She had a family. And families, she was learning, were worth everything. Helen Morrison did exactly what she promised. Within 2 weeks, she had put her house on Earth, up for sale, and secured a small apartment 3 floors down from Kyle's. She moved in with minimal belongings, claiming she wanted a fresh start. But Kyle knew the truth. His mother had fallen completely in love with Lyra and could not bear to be away from her. The 3 of them settled into a comfortable routine. Helen helped Lyra with her studies in the mornings, while Kyle worked. In the afternoons, they baked together, or Helen taught Lyra about Earth culture and history. Lyra soaked it all up like a sponge, eager to learn everything about her new family's heritage. For the first time in years, Kyle felt truly happy. He had a daughter. His mother had a purpose. And they were building something beautiful together. The adoption paperwork was moving forward slowly but steadily. Ben assured him that everything looked good. Then Ambassador Trell arrived. Kyle received the summons on a Wednesday morning. He was required to appear before the station's legal counsel in 3 days to address matters regarding the Velen child in his custody. The message was formal and cold, giving no details beyond the time and place. Ben met Kyle at his apartment that evening, his expression grim. "This is bad. Ambassador Trell is the Velen diplomatic representative for this sector. He's known for being strict about cultural matters. If he's getting involved, it means he wants to challenge your adoption." "Can he do that?" Helen asked, worry clear in her voice. "He can try. Velens have the right to petition for custody of their own citizens, especially children. If he argues that Lyra would be better served in Velen care, the council might listen." Kyle felt panic rising in his chest. "But Lyra wants to stay with us. Doesn't that matter?" "It should matter. But she's a child. Some judges don't give as much weight to children's preferences, especially when cultural issues are involved." That night, Kyle sat on the edge of Lyra's bed and told her what was happening. She listened carefully, her big eyes fixed on his face. "Will they take me away?" she asked quietly. "I won't let that happen. I promise. Promises can be broken. Mama promised she would keep me safe, but the bad people came anyway." Kyle's heart ached. "You're right. Sometimes bad things happen even when people try their best. But I will fight with everything I have to keep you with us. You're my daughter. Lyra, you're part of this family." Lyra reached out and took his hand. Through the contact, she shared her fear but also her trust in him. Whatever happened, she believed in him. The hearing took place in one of the station's formal conference rooms. Kyle sat at a table with Ben on one side and Helen on the other. Lyra sat between Kyle and Helen, small and nervous. Across from them sat Ambassador Trell. Trell was tall for a Velen, with deep blue skin and silver markings on his forehead that indicated high rank. His eyes were sharp and assessing, He wore formal diplomatic robes and carried himself with absolute authority. The council consisted of 3 members: a human judge named Patricia Green, a Krellin merchant named Vosk, and a synthetic AI representative known as Unit 7. They sat at a raised platform, looking down at everyone else. Judge Green called the hearing to order. "We are here to address the petition filed by Ambassador Trell regarding the custody of the Velen child Lyra." "Ambassador, please present your case." Trell stood, his presence commanding. "Thank you, Judge Green. I come before you today with serious concerns about the welfare of Lyra, a Velen child currently in the custody of Kyle Morrison, a human with no training or understanding of Velen culture or needs." He gestured toward Kyle. "Mr. Morrison is well-meaning, I am sure. But good intentions are not enough. Velen children require specialized care. They are empathic, sensitive to emotional environments, and need connection to their cultural heritage. A human cannot provide these things, no matter how much he cares." Trell pulled up holographic images showing Velen orphanages and educational facilities. "We have proper facilities in Velen space designed specifically for orphaned children, trained caregivers who understand empathic development, cultural education to help them maintain their identity. Lyra would be with her own people, learning her own traditions." Judge Green looked at Kyle. "Mr. Morrison, how do you respond to these concerns?" Kyle stood, his hands shaking slightly. "I understand Ambassador Trell's concerns, but I found Lyra alone and starving in the maintenance tunnels of this station. She had been there for weeks, and no one helped her. Not humans, not aliens, no one. Everyone walked past her like she didn't exist." He glanced at Lyra, who watched him with complete attention. "I took her in because it was the right thing to do. And yes, I'm not Velen. I don't have empathic abilities or specialized training. But I've learned. I've researched. I make sure she gets proper nutrition, that she learns about her culture, that she's safe and loved." "Love is not enough," Trell interrupted. "She needs more than a warm home. She needs to understand what it means to be Velen." "Then teach her," Kyle shot back. "Send us resources, connect us with Velen mentors, help us. But don't take her away from the only family she has left." The council members conferred quietly. Then Unit 7 spoke, its synthetic voice neutral and precise. "Mr. Morrison, can you demonstrate that you understand Velen empathic needs?" Kyle hesitated. He was not sure what they wanted to hear. "Lyra is empathic. She senses emotions. Strong negative emotions can hurt her. So I try to stay calm around her. I've taught her grounding techniques I learned from research. When she's overwhelmed, we do breathing exercises together." "That is basic knowledge," Trell said dismissively. "Any caregiver could learn that much. But do you understand the deeper aspects? The cultural significance of empathic bonds? The traditional ceremonies and practices that shape young Velen identity?" Kyle faltered. He did not know about ceremonies or traditional practices. He had focused on keeping Lyra healthy and happy, not on abstract cultural concepts. Trell pressed his advantage. "You see, Mr. Morrison is a kind man, but he cannot give this child what she truly needs. Lyra should be returned to Velen space, where she can grow up among her own people, learn her own ways, form proper empathic bonds with trained mentors." Judge Green looked sympathetic. "Mr. Morrison, while your care for Lyra is evident, the ambassador raises valid points. Cultural identity is important, especially for empathic species whose very nature is tied to their social structures." Kyle felt everything slipping away. They were going to take Lyra from him. All the logic and arguments in the world could not compete with the ambassador's expertise and credentials. Then Helen stood up. "May I speak?" she asked. Judge Green nodded. "Go ahead, Mrs. Morrison." Helen walked around the table to stand directly in front of the council. "I'm a mother and a grandmother. I was a teacher for 35 years, working with children from dozens of different backgrounds and cultures. So let me tell you what I've seen in the past few weeks." She turned to point at Lyra. "That child was traumatized. She watched her family die. She survived alone in space for days. She lived in tunnels eating garbage, while people ignored her or chased her away. When my son found her, she was so scared she could barely speak. Helen's voice grew stronger. And now? She laughs. She plays. She learns. She draws pictures and bakes cookies, and asks a million questions. She's healing because she has people who love her, who make her feel safe, who give her a home. She looked directly at Ambassador Trell. You talk about cultural facilities and trained caregivers. But where were those facilities when Lyra was alone? Where were those caregivers when she was starving? My son, a human with no training and no cultural knowledge, did what no one else would do. He helped. Trell's expression hardened. Emotional appeals do not change the facts. The child needs proper Velen guidance. Then guide her. Helen said forcefully. Work with us. Send teachers, mentors, resources. But don't tear her away from the family she's built. That's not about what's best for Lyra. That's about pride and politics. The room fell silent. Judge Green leaned forward. Ambassador Trell, are there alternatives to removing the child from Mr. Morrison's custody? Could you provide cultural education while allowing her to remain with the family she's bonded to? Trell opened his mouth to respond. But before he could speak, Lyra stood up. May I talk? She asked, her voice small but clear. Judge Green looked surprised. This is irregular, but yes, you may speak. Lyra walked to the center of the room. She looked tiny and vulnerable standing there alone. I am Velen. I know I am Velen. But I am also Kyle's daughter now, and Helen's granddaughter. They are my family. She turned to Ambassador Trell. The facilities you talk about. I know them. When the bad ships came, other families talked about them. They said orphans go there and wait until someone wants them. Sometimes no one ever does. They said it's lonely. Lyra's voice shook, but she continued. I don't want to be lonely anymore. I want to stay with my family. Child. Trell began, his voice softening slightly. You do not understand what you're giving up. I understand that Kyle found me when I was dying. I understand that Helen teaches me songs and makes me feel safe. I understand that I am loved. Lyra looked up at the council members. Can I show you? Can I show you what I feel? Judge Green nodded slowly. How? Velens can share emotions through touch. If you let me, I can show you. The council members looked at each other. Finally, Judge Green stood and came down from the platform. She approached Lyra carefully. Go ahead. Lyra took Judge Green's hand. The judge's eyes widened. She stood very still for a long moment. When Lyra released her hand, Judge Green had tears in her eyes. What did you feel? Vosk asked from the platform. Judge Green returned to her seat, visibly shaken. Love, safety, belonging, hope. Everything a child should feel in a healthy home. She looked at Trell. And before that, I felt her memories of the tunnels. Terror, starvation, abandonment. The despair of a child who thought she would die alone. She turned to Kyle. Whatever else is true, this child has found healing with you. That matters. The council called for a recess. Kyle, Helen, and Lyra waited in terrible suspense while the council deliberated. 2 hours felt like an eternity. Kyle held Lyra's hand the entire time, while Helen kept her other hand on the child's shoulder. Ben paced back and forth, checking his tablet for legal precedents that might help their case. Ambassador Trell sat alone on his side of the room, his expression unreadable. Finally, the council returned. Judge Green's face was neutral as she took her seat. Kyle's heart pounded so hard, he could hear it in his ears. We have reached a decision, Judge Green announced. This case presented unique challenges. On one hand, we have legitimate concerns about cultural preservation and specialized care for an empathic species. On the other hand, we have clear evidence of a child thriving in a loving home. She paused, and Kyle felt Lyra squeeze his hand tighter. After careful consideration, we rule in favor of Kyle Morrison. The adoption may proceed. However, We are adding specific conditions to ensure Lyra's cultural needs are met. Mr. Morrison must establish regular contact with Velen cultural educators. Lyra must receive proper training in empathic control and Velen traditions. These conditions are non-negotiable and will be monitored. Kyle felt his legs go weak with relief. Helen let out a sob and pulled Lyra into a tight embrace. Ben grinned and clapped Kyle on the shoulder. They had won, but Judge Green was not finished. Ambassador Trell, while your concerns were valid, this council believes that removing Lyra from her current home would cause more harm than good. However, we strongly encourage you to work with the Morrison family rather than against them. This child deserves both her cultural heritage and the family who saved her life. Ambassador Trell stood slowly. For a moment, his face showed frustration. Then, surprisingly, his expression softened. He approached Kyle's table and looked down at Lyra. "May I speak with you outside?" he asked Kyle. Kyle nodded warily. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Helen and Lyra with Ben. The ambassador studied Kyle for a long moment. "I was wrong," Trell said finally. "Not about the importance of cultural education, but about you, about your ability to care for her." "I'm trying my best," Kyle said. "I can see that. And I can see that Lyra loves you." Trell sighed deeply. "The truth is, our orphan facilities are overcrowded and underfunded. Many children spend years there with minimal attention or care. When I filed this petition, I told myself it was about preserving culture. But Judge Green was partially correct. Pride played a role too. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small data chip. This contains contact information for a Velen elder named Sarah who lives in the New Terra system. She teaches empathic training and cultural studies. She is wise and kind. I will send her a message explaining your situation. I believe she will help you." Kyle took the chip, surprised. "Thank you, Ambassador. Do not thank me yet. I will be watching, Mr. Morrison. If I believe Lyra is not receiving proper cultural education, I will petition again. But I hope that will not be necessary." Trell's expression softened further. "What you did for her, finding her and giving her a home, that took courage. Perhaps humans understand something about family that we Velens have forgotten in our bureaucracy." He extended his hand in the human custom of handshake. Kyle took it, and they shook firmly. "Take care of her," Trell said. "She has already lost too much." "I will, I promise." When Kyle returned to the conference room, Lyra ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "We can stay together?" "Yes, we're a family. Nothing is going to change that." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Helen officially moved her remaining belongings from Earth to New Terra Station. She took a part-time job at the station's educational center, working with children of various species. It gave her purpose and brought in some income. Though she spent most of her free time with Lyra, Kyle contacted Sarah, the Velen elder Ambassador Trell had mentioned. She agreed to weekly video lessons with Lyra. The first session was awkward, but Sarah was patient and kind. She taught Lyra meditation techniques for controlling her empathic abilities and told her stories about Velen history and mythology. Lyra soaked it all up eagerly. She practiced her meditation every morning and asked questions about her people's traditions. But she also learned about human culture from Helen, about Earth holidays and history and customs. She was becoming something unique. A Velen child raised in a human family, belonging to both cultures and limited by neither. The adoption was finalized 6 weeks after the hearing. The ceremony was small, held in the station's administrative office. Kyle signed the papers making Lyra legally his daughter. She signed too, her hands shaky but determined as she wrote her name. Helen stood beside them, crying happy tears. Ben brought a cake to celebrate. It was chocolate, Lyra's favorite. They ate it in Kyle's apartment, laughing and talking about the future. Lyra wanted to know if she could get a pet. Helen suggested a small one, maybe a rabbit. Kyle agreed, as long as Lyra promised to take care of it. As the months passed, word spread about the human family who had adopted a Velen child. Some people were curious, others judgmental. But Kyle found more support than he expected. Other families, both human and alien, reached out. Some had considered cross-species adoption but had been afraid of the social stigma. Kyle's case had given them hope. One couple, a human woman named Lisa and her Krellin husband Tarnak, adopted 2 orphan siblings from a war-torn sector. They came to Kyle for advice, and he shared everything he had learned. It felt good to help others the way Ben and Sarah had helped him. Lyra enrolled in the station's school program 6 months after the adoption was finalized. Helen had been homeschooling her, but they both agreed Lyra needed interaction with other children. She was nervous on her first day, worried that the other kids would not accept her. But children, Kyle learned, were often kinder than adults. They saw Lyra as the new kid, not as an alien. She made friends with a human boy named Chris and a girl from the insectoid species called Mantrin. They played together during breaks and studied together after school. Lyra's empathic abilities, once a source of fear and confusion, became a gift. She could sense when her classmates were upset or struggling. She offered comfort and understanding without needing words. Teachers noticed and praised her emotional intelligence. She became known as the kind girl who always knew when someone needed a friend. One evening, almost a year after Kyle had found Lyra in the tunnels, he sat in his living room watching her and Helen work on a puzzle together. They were laughing about something, their heads close together as they searched for matching pieces. The apartment walls were covered with Lyra's drawings and Helen's photos. The space that had once been cold and empty now felt warm and alive. Kyle thought about everything that had led to this moment. The shuttle accident that had shattered his world. The years of grief and loneliness. The random decision to take the maintenance tunnel that night. The choice to help when he could have walked away. His life had not turned out the way he planned. He had lost a wife and daughter he would never stop loving. But he had gained something precious too. A second chance at family. At fatherhood. At happiness. Kyle, come help us, Lyra called out. This puzzle is too hard. He joined them on the floor, fitting pieces together and listening to their chatter. Helen told a story about when Kyle was young and had tried to build a treehouse that immediately fell apart. Lyra laughed so hard she nearly knocked over the puzzle. Later, after Helen had gone to her own apartment, Kyle tucked Lyra into bed. She was 10 now, or the equivalent age for Velens. Still small, but growing. She had learned to braid her hair like Helen taught her and wore the friendship bracelet Chris had made for her. Kyle, she said as he turned off the light. Yes? Do you ever regret finding me? Do you wish your life was simpler? Kyle sat back down on the edge of her bed. He knew where this question came from. Lyra still had nightmares sometimes. Still carried trauma from losing her first family. She worried about being a burden. About not being good enough. Never, he said firmly. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life, Lyra. I was just going through the motions before, surviving but not really living. You gave me a reason to be happy again. I saved you? Lyra sounded surprised. Yes. You remind me every day why life is worth living. Why love is worth the risk. You, Grandmother Helen, our family, all of it. I wouldn't change anything. Lyra reached out and took his hand. Through the empathic connection, she shared what she felt. Love, deep and unconditional. Gratitude, belonging. The absolute certainty that she was home. Kyle squeezed her hand gently. Get some sleep. Big test tomorrow in your history class. Will you and Grandmother Helen come to the school presentation next week? We're doing reports on our families. We'll be there, front row. Lyra smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing slowed as sleep took her. Kyle stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep peacefully. He thought about Ambassador Trell's final words to him after the hearing. The ambassador had said humans understood something about family that others had forgotten. Maybe he was right. Humans had this strange ability to look at someone completely different from themselves and see family. They could love across boundaries of species, culture, and biology. They could take in the lost and forgotten and make them part of their hearts. In a galaxy where most species stayed within their own kind, humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their military power. It was this: their willingness to open their hearts to anyone who needed love. Their refusal to walk past someone in need just because that someone looked different. Kyle had walked through those maintenance tunnels 1,000 times before that night. But on that one night, he had stopped. He had looked at a scared alien child and seen someone who needed help, and that simple choice, that human impulse to care for the vulnerable, had changed everything. He thought about all the people who had walked past Lyra before him. Other species, other humans even. They had their reasons. They were busy. It was not their problem. Someone else would help. But Kyle had stopped. And in stopping, in choosing compassion over convenience, he had not just saved Lyra's life, he had saved his own. Kyle turned off the hallway light and headed to his own room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of this unexpected life he had built. But tonight, his daughter slept safely, his mother lived nearby, and his home was full of love. And that, Kyle thought, was more than enough. That was everything.